Have you ever wondered what happened to the man who was set free instead of Jesus? Most people know the name Barabbas. They remember the moment when the crowd asked Pontius Pilate to release him while Jesus was sentenced to die on the cross. It is one of the most famous moments in the Bible. But after Barabbas walked free, what happened to him? Did he go back to his old life? Did he stay in Jerusalem and watch Jesus die? Did seeing an innocent man take his place change him forever? Or did he simply disappear without anyone knowing what happened next? The truth is surprising. After his release, Barabbas almost completely disappears from history. The Bible never tells us where he went or what became of him. No reliable first-century records tell us either. Because of this, many stories and theories have been told over the centuries. But what can history actually tell us? In this video, we'll look at what the Gospels say, the history of Roman Judea, and the evidence that still exists. We'll separate facts from tradition and discover why the Bible never tells us the rest of Barabbas' story. To understand what may have happened after his release, we first need to go back to Jerusalem during one of the most tense times in its history. It was the week of Passover. Every year, thousands of Jewish pilgrims came to Jerusalem to celebrate how God had rescued their ancestors from slavery in Egypt. The city became crowded with visitors from many places, and the temple was filled with worshippers. But Passover was more than a religious celebration. It reminded the Jewish people that God had once freed them from a powerful empire. Now, however, they were living under the rule of Rome. Because of this, Roman leaders watched the city very closely. They knew that a celebration about freedom could easily lead to protests or even rebellion. That is why the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, came to Jerusalem during the festival instead of staying in his usual home at Caesarea. Pilate's job was simple: keep the peace. Roman soldiers filled the streets. More troops waited at the Antonia fortress near the temple. If anyone tried to start a rebellion, Rome was ready to stop it immediately. It was during this tense time that we meet Barabbas. Many people think Barabbas was just a thief, but the Gospels describe him differently. Mark, Luke, and John say he had taken part in a rebellion in which someone was killed. To the Romans, he was a dangerous criminal who had challenged their authority. Crimes like that usually ended in only one way: crucifixion. The Romans used crucifixion not only to punish criminals, but also to frighten everyone else. Anyone who thought about rebelling against Rome would see the crosses and understand the cost. Barabbas knew exactly what was waiting for him. By the morning of his trial, he probably believed he was living his last few hours. There was no reason to expect mercy or freedom. His death seemed certain. But on that same morning, another prisoner was brought before Pontius Pilate. His name was Jesus of Nazareth. One decision made that day would change the lives of both men forever. All four Gospels agree on one important fact: Barabbas was not an ordinary prisoner. Mark says he was involved in a rebellion where a murder was committed. Luke also says he was guilty of rebellion and murder. John calls him a bandit. In those days, that word could also describe someone who fought against Roman rule. Matthew simply calls him a well-known prisoner, meaning many people already knew who he was. Although each gospel uses different words, they all describe the same kind of man. Barabbas was considered dangerous. At that time, small groups of Jews sometimes tried to fight against Roman rule. These revolts never lasted long. The Roman army quickly crushed them. The leaders were arrested, and many were crucified in public so everyone could see what happened to those who challenged Rome. For the Romans, rebellion was one of the worst crimes anyone could commit. Crucifixion was designed to send a clear message: do not rebel against the empire. If Barabbas really took part in one of these uprisings, he already knew what his future looked like. He had probably seen other rebels march through the streets to their deaths. He knew that people accused of crimes like his almost never escaped. As he waited in his prison cell, he was not hoping for another trial. He was simply waiting for Roman soldiers to come and lead him to the cross. Roman prisons were not like modern prisons. Most prisoners stayed there only until their punishment was carried out. For someone accused of rebellion and murder, there was almost no chance of release. Everything pointed to the same ending. As the people of Jerusalem prepared to celebrate Passover, Barabbas believed he was living the final day of his life. Outside, the streets were full of visitors. Merchants opened their shops. Priests prepared for worship at the temple. Families gathered to celebrate God's faithfulness. But inside a prison cell, one condemned man waited for death. What Barabbas did not know was that, at that very moment, another trial was taking place. A trial that would change his life forever. That morning, two prisoners stood before the Roman justice system. One was Barabbas, a man accused of rebellion and murder. The other was Jesus of Nazareth, who had been arrested after being questioned by the Jewish religious leaders. Although both men were prisoners, they were very different. Barabbas had taken part in violence against Rome. Jesus had never led an armed rebellion. Instead, he was accused of claiming to be the king of the Jews. To the Romans, that title could sound like a challenge to Caesar, even though Jesus had not started a political movement. Because of this, Pontius Pilate had to deal with the case carefully. As the Roman governor, his main job was to keep peace in Judea. During Passover, that job became even more difficult. The city was packed with thousands of visitors. If a riot started, Pilate could lose the trust of Rome. The Gospels tell us that Pilate did not believe Jesus deserved to die. More than once, he said he could find no crime worthy of execution. But the chief priests and other religious leaders kept pressuring him. Soon, Pilate found himself trapped between justice and politics. If he released Jesus, the angry crowd might riot. If he condemned Jesus, he would be putting an innocent man to death. According to the Gospels, there was a custom during Passover in which one prisoner could be released. Historians still debate whether this custom existed exactly as described, because no Roman records mention it. Even so, all four Gospels agree that Pilate offered the crowd a choice. He asked them, "Which prisoner do you want me to release?" The choice was between Jesus and Barabbas. Pilate probably thought the answer was obvious. On one side stood a man known for violence, rebellion, and murder. On the other stood a teacher who healed the sick, fed the hungry, and preached about God's kingdom. Surely the crowd would choose Jesus, but something unexpected happened. The chief priests persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas instead. Soon the people began shouting, "Release Barabbas!" Then they cried, "Crucify Jesus!" Pilate tried again. "What shall I do with Jesus?" The crowd shouted even louder, "Crucify him!" The pressure kept growing. Pilate realized the situation could quickly turn into a riot. Rather than risk an uprising during Passover, he gave in to the crowd's demands. He ordered Barabbas to be released. Jesus was handed over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. Imagine what that moment must have been like for Barabbas. Only hours earlier, he had believed he was going to die. Now his chains were removed. The prison doors opened. He was told he was free. Nothing had changed about his crimes. He had not proved his innocence. No new evidence had appeared. He was still guilty under Roman law. The only thing that changed was Pilate's decision. As Barabbas walked out of prison, Jesus began walking toward the cross. For a brief moment, the lives of these two men crossed forever. One man walked away free. The other walked toward death. This is why Barabbas has become one of the most unforgettable people in the Passion story. Yet after this moment, something surprising happens. The Bible never tells us what Barabbas did next. Did he stay in Jerusalem? Did he watch Jesus carry the cross? Did he witness the crucifixion from a distance? Or did he leave the city as quickly as he could? The Gospels give no answer. We simply don't know. What we do know is what happened to Jesus. After Pilate announced his decision, Roman soldiers took Jesus away. Before crucifixion, prisoners were usually whipped severely. This punishment made them weak before they even reached the place of execution. Then the condemned person was forced to carry the wooden crossbeam through the streets. This public march was meant to warn everyone not to challenge Rome. Crucifixion was more than an execution. It was a public display of Roman power. Here, the stories of Jesus and Barabbas become forever connected. Only a short time earlier, Barabbas had expected to walk that same road. His crime made crucifixion almost certain. Instead, Jesus walked it. The Bible never says that Jesus carried the exact cross prepared for Barabbas. But many historians believe that Rome would already have had everything ready for the day's executions. Whether or not it was the same cross, the message is clear. The guilty man was set free. The innocent man went to the cross. What happened after that is one of history's greatest mysteries. We don't know whether Barabbas stayed to watch the crucifixion. Jerusalem was crowded that day. Roman soldiers marched through the streets. Large crowds followed Jesus to Golgotha. It would have been difficult not to notice what was happening. Perhaps Barabbas watched from a distance. Perhaps he quietly disappeared into the city. Or perhaps he left Jerusalem without looking back. The truth is, no one knows. And when history gives us no answer, the honest response is simply to admit it. What the Bible does tell us is enough to understand the powerful moment that took place. A man who deserved punishment was set free. Another man willingly accepted the sentence instead. From that moment on, their lives went in completely different directions. After Barabbas was released, the Bible never mentions him again. We are not told where he went, what he did, or even what he was thinking. From that moment on, the gospel writers turn all their attention to Jesus. Jesus was taken by Roman soldiers to be crucified. After being beaten and mocked, he was led through the streets of Jerusalem toward Golgotha, the place of execution. Meanwhile, Barabbas was free. Only a few hours earlier, he had expected to die. Now, another man was walking the road that seemed meant for him. This is one of the most powerful moments in the entire gospel story. The guilty man was released. The innocent man was condemned. Some people wonder if Barabbas followed the crowd to Golgotha. Did he watch Jesus carry the cross? Did he see him nailed to it? Did he hear his final words? The Bible never says. It is possible that he watched from a distance. It is also possible that he left Jerusalem as soon as he was released. We simply do not know. The gospel writers leave that question unanswered, and that is important. Instead of guessing, they focus on what matters most, Jesus' death on the cross. As Jesus hung on the cross, many people watched. Roman soldiers stood guard. Religious leaders mocked him. Some of his followers watched from a distance. But Barabbas is never mentioned. His story ends as suddenly as it began. For many readers, this silence is surprising. Barabbas played an important role in one of the biggest moments in history. Yet after his release, he disappears completely. No first-century writer tells us what happened next. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, who wrote in great detail about Judea and the Roman Empire, never mentions Barabbas again. Neither does the Roman historian Tacitus. There are no official records, no personal letters, no eyewitness accounts. Nothing tells us how the rest of his life unfolded. At first, that may seem strange, but for historians, it is actually very common. Most ordinary people in the ancient world left no written records behind. History usually remembers kings, governors, generals, and famous leaders. People like Barabbas often disappeared from the historical record after the events that made them known. Many people who witnessed amazing events are mentioned only once in ancient writings. After that, they simply vanish from history. Barabbas fits that pattern perfectly. Another reason for this silence is what happened years later. In AD 70, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. The temple was burned. Large parts of the city were destroyed. Many people were killed or forced to leave. Countless documents, records, and personal writings were lost forever. Because of this, historians know that much of Judea's history disappeared during that terrible event. Even if records about Barabbas once existed, they may have been destroyed. This is one of the biggest challenges when studying the ancient world. Only a small number of ancient documents have survived. Many books were lost, letters decayed, government records disappeared. Wars and fires destroyed countless historical documents. As a result, historians often know about major events, but very little about the ordinary people who lived through them. Barabbas is just one example. His brief appearance in the Gospels is all that history can confirm. Everything else is unknown. Centuries later, stories about Barabbas began to appear. Some traditions claimed he repented and became a follower of Jesus. Others said he spent the rest of his life feeling guilty because another man died in his place. Some stories even claimed he met a tragic end. These stories are interesting, But there is one important problem. None of them comes from reliable first-century evidence. They were written much later. That means they belong to tradition, not history. Good historians make an important distinction. They separate what is supported by evidence from what is based on later stories or imagination. When there is no evidence, the honest answer is simple. We don't know. That may feel unsatisfying, but it is the most truthful conclusion. Sometimes history gives us clear answers. Sometimes it leaves us with mysteries. Barabbas is one of those mysteries. Beyond the few verses recorded in the Gospels, every idea about his later life is only a possibility, not a proven fact. And perhaps that is one reason people are still fascinated by him today. His story ends with a question mark. The Bible tells us how he received his freedom, but it never tells us what he did with it. Although history tells us almost nothing about Barabbas after his release, his name has never been forgotten. For nearly 2,000 years, people have wondered what became of him. Did he change after that day? Did he ever think about the man who died in his place? Or did he simply return to his old life? The truth is, no one knows. But over the centuries, many stories have been told. Some Christian traditions say Barabbas later repented and became a follower of Jesus. Others say he lived with guilt for the rest of his life because an innocent man died instead of him. Some stories even say he met a tragic end. These stories are interesting, but there is one problem. They are not based on reliable first-century evidence. They were written many years after the events happened. That means we cannot treat them as historical facts. Responsible historians always separate facts from tradition. The facts come from sources that can be examined and compared with other evidence. Traditions may preserve old beliefs or ideas, but they cannot always be proven. When it comes to Barabbas, the historical facts are very limited. We know he was arrested for rebellion and murder. We know Pilate offered the crowd a choice between Jesus and Barabbas. We know the crowd chose Barabbas. We know Jesus was crucified. And we know Barabbas was released. After that, history becomes silent. Even though we know very little about Barabbas, his story has had a huge impact on Christian thinking. Many Christians see him as a picture of one of the main messages of the gospel. A guilty man was set free. An innocent man took his place. This is often called substitution. According to Christian belief, Jesus died for the sins of others. In that sense, many people see Barabbas as a living example of what Jesus came to do. However, it is important to understand the difference between history and theology. Historically, we cannot say Barabbas understood what happened. The Bible never tells us what he believed. It never says he became a disciple. It never says he repented. It never records another conversation with him. These ideas may be meaningful reflections, but they are not historical facts. The gospel writers simply do not tell us. Perhaps that was intentional. Their goal was not to tell the story of Barabbas. Their goal was to tell the story of Jesus. Barabbas appears only for a short moment, but in that moment, he helps readers see an unforgettable contrast. One man deserved punishment but was released. The other was declared innocent, yet willingly went to the cross. That powerful picture has stayed with readers for centuries. Maybe that is why the gospel writers never added another chapter to Barabbas' life. His role in the story was complete. The focus was always meant to stay on Jesus. Because of that, Barabbas remains one of the most mysterious people in the entire Bible. We know exactly how his story changed, but we know almost nothing about what happened afterward. And sometimes, history leaves us with questions instead of answers. So, what really happened to Barabbas after Jesus took his place? The most honest answer is also the simplest. We don't know. The Gospels clearly tell us that Barabbas was released, but after that moment, they never mention him again. No reliable first-century historian tells us where he went. No ancient document explains whether he stayed in Jerusalem, watched the crucifixion, returned to his old life, or became a different man. History simply goes silent. For many people, that can be frustrating. We naturally want to know how the story ended. Did Barabbas feel thankful? Did he feel guilty? Did he ever realize that an innocent man had died instead of him? The truth is, we cannot answer those questions with certainty. And when the evidence ends, responsible history must stop there. Sometimes the most honest answer is, we don't know. But perhaps that silence has a purpose. If the gospel writers had wanted to tell us what happened to Barabbas, they probably could have. Instead, they chose to keep our attention on Jesus. Their message was never about the man who was released. It was about the one who willingly went to the cross. That is why Jesus remains at the center of the story. Barabbas appears for only a few verses, yet those few verses have been remembered for nearly 2,000 years. His story reminds us of one of the most dramatic moments in the Bible. A guilty man walked away free. An innocent man accepted the punishment instead. Whether you see this as history, theology, or both, it is one of the most powerful scenes in the gospel accounts. For historians, Barabbas reminds us that we cannot know everything about the ancient world. Many records have been lost forever. Many ordinary people's lives disappeared from history without leaving any trace. Barabbas is one of those people. He steps onto the stage of history for one unforgettable moment, and then disappears. For Christians, however, his story points to something even greater. The focus is not on the man who was set free. The focus is on Jesus Christ, whose death and resurrection are the heart of the gospel. That is why the gospel writers never returned to Barabbas. His part in the story was finished. Jesus' story was only beginning. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson we can learn from the silence surrounding Barabbas. Some mysteries of history may never be solved, but even without all the answers, the message of the gospel remains clear. Barabbas left the prison alive. Jesus walked to the cross. One man received freedom, the other gave his life. And that single moment has continued to inspire, challenge, and move people for nearly 2,000 years. If you enjoyed exploring the history behind the Bible, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next Bible history documentary. Now we'd love to hear from you. What do you think happened to Barabbas after his release? Do you think that unforgettable day changed his life forever? Or do you believe he simply returned to the life he had always known? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to read them. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.